Hey guys, welcome to another video. I think you'll absolutely love this video. We have an iconic knife here that we're about to do a complete overhaul on. Stay tuned. Now what you're looking at here is a Buck Knives 110 Folding Hunter. Now this is a really special knife, but not because it's so unique or rare. Actually, it's somewhat the opposite. The Buck 110, this knife you're looking at right here, is the knife that started it all. You're probably looking at the shape and style of the knife and you say, well, every man and his dog has a knife like this. And I've seen tons of them growing up. A lot of old traditional folders like your grandfather would have or your dad would have would look probably just like this. You've got the wood and the brass bolster and the traditional clip point blade. But this is the one that started it all because it's made by Buck. So Buck originally came up with this pattern. They designed it and they created the lock back design. So any other lock knife in the world right now, you have to thank Buck Knives for that. And this is just a standard model that was sent to me by a friend and a customer of mine, and he wants some special work done to it. So first of all, you see that it's pretty dull and tarnished looking. So all that brass is completely lost its luster, it's dark. We've got a blade that needs to be cleaned up and sharpened, although it's not in real rough shape, it just needs some work. I'm thinking about doing some kind of a surprise for him on the blade, maybe doing some kind of a polish. I think I can pull that off. And the biggest part here, the biggest job, is that we're going to do new scales. So these are the factory resin impregnated wood here, wood scales, and we're going to replace those with real buffalo horn. So this is stabilized buffalo horn that was sent up from the States by the owner of the knife. So we have two billets here. They're way too thick right now, so I'm going to have to take them down. But these are going to end up on there somehow. It's not an easy job. It's going to be a bit of a trick, I'm sure. Here's the back side so you can see. Should be interesting. It's very beautiful material, but it's definitely going to be a bit of a trick to get those on here. So let's get started by doing the rough work, taking this apart. So what's happening here is I believe these scales are held on with a little bit of glue from factory, and then we have, you see, 4 pins. Now this pin here goes straight through the entire knife, right through this lock bar spacer. So this is the bar that locks your knife, and it rotates right on this pin. So that's an important one. We're going to take the head off that, tap it out, and we're going to keep it. These pins here are only here to keep the scales in place. So they're just there as support for the scales. And when we do put this back together, we're not going to have these pins. We're going to have sort of a custom shop look without all those pins. You're not going to see any of these pins when we're done. So for starters, I'm going to take the head off of this one and we'll try to tap it out. Let's try something that cuts a little faster here. So that lock bar you can see was kept in by that pin. So we can clean and polish that all up. Some people like to do file work on these. I'm not authorized to do anything like that, but I will certainly clean it up, and our blade can now swing freely. So we'll make sure we cover that up with some tape. Now I'll finish tapping that pin out. Okay, we've got it in there. You could go ahead and grind off the heads of all the pins. Might make it a little bit easier, but didn't really want to do that, but I might have to. There we go, it popped. Just grab a flat top screwdriver in there now, and you should be able to pop it right out. And you see those rivets were just stuck in those holes there, just to keep the scale on. And that's what we have left inside. So there's our two scales off. Nice and clean, not too much carnage. They're not really usable again because we had to grind off that pin, but other than that, if you could drill out that pin really cleanly, you could probably put these right back on again. This is what our knife looks like inside. Now once we have both little scales off, we can go ahead and put our lock bar back in. Our new scales will be epoxied right on the face of this knife here, so we don't have to deal with this anymore. The lock bar will just sit in this knot, and this is where your lock is right here. So this hooks in the back of your blade and stops your blade from being able to close up. But we can hook that in. Your spring is right down here, you can see. So as we press this lock bar back in, we need to push this back in for these holes to align here, and we can slip our pin through. There we go. Now the Buck Knives Company also has a custom shop within their shop. They make these knives stock, so you can buy them just like this, or in their custom shop you can order them with special configurations and such. And what they do is they do exactly what I'm doing here. You get custom scales, whatever you pick out of their options, that go here. There's no pins, and you don't see this pin either. Like we're going to make it now, it's going to be invisible inside the knife. And to do that, they make their brass liners here with a chamfered inside edge, so that when they recess this pin inside, let me give it a tap here just to flatten it down. So you can see as we tap that rod in there, it's recessed. Even though it has a nice big head on it, it's recessed down in the liner because that hole is chamfered. So for this side of the knife then, it's the same thing. We just need to cut this pin off to the appropriate length and peen it out so it fits nicely down in that chamfered or recessed hole there. And we'll have a nice finish for our scale. So let's do that right now. Here's an idea I've learned from someone else off the internet. These wood vices are great, but there are certain times when you'd like a machinist style vise, or just like a normal shop style vise. So by building a little T-base like this, it just takes a second and you have a solidly mounted shop vise right on your same bench without taking up any more space. And just that quickly you can take it back out. Just an idea, if you're looking for a vise this style, it's a great setup. Right now I'm going to peen out this head. I've left it just barely, just a fraction out above the liner. And what peening means is to hammer the head of a piece of steel and flare it out, so sort of mushroom it out. You're deforming the head, and hopefully it'll fill out and pinch this knife together. So to peen like this, you need a real solid surface to hit on. So I'm just going to lay the knife flat on the hard surface. Make sure that pin is supported on the bottom side where the head is already made. I'm just going to try to hammer out the head of this little pin. Now I also notice that there's a little bit of play in this blade. This pivot here is opened up a little bit. What you can't see is that from factory, because they do such a good job of machining this down and finishing it, there's actually a brass, I believe it's a brass rivet right through this bolster here that goes straight through the blade and out the other side. and the ends of it is chamfered as well. If you give a few taps on this bolster here, right where you think the pin would be, it should tighten up that pivot. Now you got to be careful with this one because you are tapping on brass, and brass is real soft. You wouldn't want to beat up the bolster on your knife. And this isn't even my knife, it's someone else's, so. Okay, it's a little bit tighter. Let me move down here on this surface. So as not to bore you, these were very thick blocks of scales. Here's the thickness they came in, which was way too thick to work with. So I slimmed them down almost they're just a hair thicker now than what's going to be on the knife. So I'll need to take a little film off with final sanding. But now I've got a workable thickness. I need to start layout. So what I've done is I've beveled this edge, which I will now mark this line here along with it, because that's the plane I need. This material here I'll cut out after it's on the knife and glued, so I get an absolute perfect fit. But this is the angle I need. So I've chosen wisely which part, because if I had have cut it out down here, I would have lost a lot of that cool white. So it's just a matter of preference and picking what I think would be prettiest. And I think that's right about here. So I get lots of white and lots of nice black as well. Maybe I'll come up a little further here to get a little more black, but you get the idea. Using my Case Warncliffe here. Man, this is such a good shop knife. Just been using it constantly in the shop. That tip for layout like this is just the absolute perfect thing. Okay, we've got to be extra perfect here. It's insanely precise. And that's it right there. Just going to butt my knife up across the back of that scale and just score it ever so lightly, enough so that you can barely see. I don't know if you can see that line. Yeah, you definitely can. Just barely marred the surface there. And then I'll have my perfectly angled piece to fit in that knife. Here we have it, a set of scales for our buck 110. These have both been milled down just to fit just right on this knife. I'm going to go in the basement now where there's not much light, so I'll spare you that. But what I'm going to do is wipe this down with a little bit of mineral spirits or paint thinner just to cut any grease or any gunk off of this knife. And then I'm going to mix up just a 2-part epoxy, a 5-minute epoxy. Set these scales in place and lay a little bit of weight on them, not too much to squeeze out all my glue, just enough so that it's pressed nicely in place, and leave it till sometime tomorrow. So we'll check back then. So now that everything is cut, glued, fitted, and in place, we used a whole lot of tricks to do that. So we used the belt sander and the Dremel, and we used a bandsaw, all types of things to speed it up. At this point, we're done with all those tricks. All that's left is hard work and sandpaper, because there's no way to finish this to the finish you want, which is that hand perfect finish with any power tools. They're too aggressive, they cut too quick. So I'm just going to start with various grits of sandpaper. I've got some real good 150 here I'll start with, and yep, no secrets. Just work it until you've got a finish you like. I'll work up through various grits right up to 2000 is the highest I have here. Now one nice thing about working with a Buck 110 is that brass, it's got a lot of brass on here, and brass is really soft. So, and it gives a beautiful finish. So you can sand brass easily with sandpaper, and it polishes up easily on a felt wheel. So I'm just going to work at this for a while. We'll see where we get. And here we have our first rough sharpening, so that's with that 150 grit. We can really see how good our seams are now. Now I'll move to some 3M 220 grit, which is really good paper, and you'll start to see a nicer finish coming out. It's really coarse here now. If you can see the surface of that brass, you can see it's all scratched up. Looks really rough, but don't lose hope yet. You can feel how it feels in the hand now, because you've got all those bumps and everything took off. Now that's our 220 grit finish, still very coarse but a little more refined. Start to see a little glimmer coming out on that brass, but not much at all. It's really rough. This is our 2000 grit finish, which is pretty good. But brass is so soft that even with something as high as 2000 grit on the brass, it still leaves sort of a scratchy pattern. I cleaned up the blade as well. It had some really bad scores and scratches in the blade, so I sanded that down, and now it's time to put the real finish on this knife. Now just like that, we have our finished product. Our Buck 110 with genuine American buffalo horn scales that weren't cheap, by the way. These scales weren't cheap, let me tell you. I helped the owner pick these out, and he invested in them. But look at that finish. It took a standard plain old Buck 110 and made it into a collector's piece. Give you a close-up shot of those scales. I love this coloration. Just absolutely gorgeous. That black and the white with even the touches of yellow and gold in there to match the brass. Just beautiful. That blade cleaned up well. Now all that's left is to sharpen it. Really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Hit that like button if you did. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought. If you want this done to your own knife, I take mail-ins. Contact me at weederfan.business@gmail.com. Mail your knife in and we can talk about some details on how to get your knife done with your own custom material. There it is. Beautiful piece that I'm proud of. I think the owner is going to really like what he gets returned to him here. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.